Welcome to the Still Curtain podcast. It is Monday, April 14th, and we're 10 days away from the NFL draft. But perhaps more importantly, TJ Watt could one out of Pittsburgh. I'm Josh Yorish, and today I'm going to be talking about everybody's favorite NFL offseason subplot, cryptic Instagram stories. You know you love them. And I'm bringing them to you because, well, TJ Watt gave us one, not a diva wide receiver. The Steelers maybe have two of those, depending on how you want to categorize DK Metcalf, but it's not a receiver. It's not a quarterback, though they are in pursuit of maybe the most mercurial quarterback in the NFL. It's TJ Watt. And this was unexpected offseason subplot. Watt is set to make $21 million. His cap hit kind of differs, but a little over $20 million in the final year of his contract in 2025. It felt like a foregone conclusion that the Steelers would find a way to extend him this offseason. But now that might not be a certainty after Watt posted an Instagram story at the end of last week with him on the field in his Steelers uniform, giving the peace sign, throwing up the peace sign. Maybe that's nothing, but these players know what type of reaction things like that get. They're very aware of the stir they can create with their social media platforms. And so are agents. And players can use those to stir up a conversation about their contract situation, about potential trade requests that could be incoming, and they don't even have to be the bad guy, right? They can control the narrative in a much more subtle way. Maybe that post was nothing. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. Maybe Watt will sign an extension before the draft, after the draft, at some point this offseason, and be a Steeler for life, a one-helmet guy that everyone wants Watt to be, like it looks like Cam Hayward is going to ultimately be with the Steelers. But maybe not, because he's going to be very expensive, and he's getting up there in age. This will be his age 31 season. So let's get into a couple of the details and the context surrounding this cryptic Instagram post, which is just the most fun thing in the offseason. Who doesn't love dissecting Instagram stories as much as possible? And this is actually something I might have missed because I'm not spending very much time on Instagram or other social medias anymore. I try to avoid it as much as possible. But you know, these stories are always going to find their way to bubble to the surface for everyone, even people that have deleted Instagram off their phone because they couldn't control themselves watching Instagram stories and were wasting far too much of their time that they could be spending preparing for a podcast such as this or writing for any of the numerous fan-sided sites. So, Myles Garrett, edge rusher in Cleveland, same draft class as Watt, though Watt is 14 months older, about 14 months older than Myles Garrett, just received a 4-year, $160 million contract extension from the Cleveland Browns after previously requesting a trade this offseason. Watt will be expecting a contract in that ballpark, but Watt's going to turn 31 in October and just finished with 11 and a half sacks in a slightly underwhelming season that was plagued by injuries, and he was battling through different ankle issues and different minor setbacks that didn't really cause him to miss games, but did severely impact his effectiveness down the stretch of the season. And that's been the case 2 of the last 3 years for Watt as he's dealt with injuries. He was fantastic 2 years ago, but 3 years ago, obviously missed considerable time with the upper body injury that didn't require surgery. He was able to come back, but wasn't really himself. And that's kind of the backdrop. Then he posted the picture of him giving the peace sign. which some have immediately interpreted as Watt saying goodbye to Pittsburgh and indicating that he wants out. More likely, it's just a bit of a leverage play to say these contract negotiations are not off to a quick start. That's what Ian Rappaport said when he did a hit with Good Morning Football that has since circulated. That's how Ian's interpreting this. It feels like things are not moving in a very positive direction. That at least feels safe to say regarding the TJ Watt extension talk. So that brings to mind a couple of questions. Should the Steelers be willing to pay Watt a Myles Garrett-esque contract? What would the Steelers get in a trade for TJ Watt if they are going to consider that avenue? And can the Steelers win a Super Bowl continuing to have the NFL's most expensive defense? That one to me feels like the crux of this, because while it's just an offseason negotiation with a franchise player, right? A franchise legend. I say just, that's a big deal. It's in the context of potentially a franchise crossroads. This is what I've been asking of the Steelers for years. What is your direction? This is a chance to clearly define it. With so much up in the air, with the Aaron Rodgers situation still dragging out. If you thought that Rodgers was going to make an appearance at McAfee's in-person show in Pittsburgh, whatever he called it, and say he was signing with the Steelers, that didn't happen. That deadline has passed. We're heading towards the draft, and that is another deadline potentially. The Steelers have a chance to really define what direction they're going in. And maybe the DK Metcalf trade did that. Maybe the DK Metcalf trade signaled we are going in to try to win as many games as possible this season. We're going to try to get a veteran quarterback that can do that. But now that this Watt contract situation appears to be in more flux than we anticipated, maybe this is an escape hatch for the Steelers to say, nope, DK Metcalf trade aside, we're going to retool this thing. We're going to look to the future. We're going to have a long-term perspective towards our roster build this offseason. That wouldn't necessarily jive with the Darius Slay signing in the secondary, but they haven't locked themselves into any long-term situations. So there is still a chance for the Steelers to go the rebuild route. And ultimately, that's the route that I think is going to give them the best chance of ultimately winning a Super Bowl. It won't give you the best chance this year, but this isn't every year win the most amount of games, even though that's how Mike Tomlin operates. This is trying to win a Super Bowl, right? And that's a divide in how people view sports, right? Some people see it as a zero-sum game, and maybe that's not as fun. Sometimes it is fun to just make incremental improvements and win a playoff game. I see the value in that, right? The Minnesota Vikings are a great example of that. They looked like a team that was going to be lost. Sam Darnold had a really fun season for them. They didn't ultimately win a playoff game, but they won a lot of games. They weren't going to win a Super Bowl with Sam Darnold, but that was a fun season. The Steelers haven't had anything like that in a long time. The Steelers have made the playoffs a bunch of times, have had first-round exits numerous times since their last playoff win in 2016. So, yeah, it's starting to become a zero-sum game for the Steelers. So, can the Steelers win the Super Bowl with the NFL's most expensive defense? I'm going to say no. Let's just take a look at some of the highest paid defensive players by average annual value and where Watt would kind of slot into that, because the Steelers already have the most expensive defense in the NFL for this season. If they continue to pay Watt with the other contracts they have, an Alex Highsmith contract, Cam Hayward still under contract, they're going to continue to be near the top, if not at the top, of defensive spending. So what would Watt's average annual value kind of look like? Well, Myles Garrett's number one at $40 million a year, his 4-year deal, which he signed at 29 years old. That feels important, the age. Danielle Hunter is actually going to be number 2 on the defensive side of the ball in terms of AAV. 1-year deal at 30 years old, 35.6 million. Max Crosby signed a 3-year deal at 27 years old, 35.5 million. Nick Bosa is already into his massive extension, a 5-year deal he signed at age 25 that pays him 34 million a year. And Chris Jones, this one feels important, a 5-year deal he signed at 29 years old, 31.7 million. TJ Watt at 30, older than all of those players except Hunter, and Hunter got a 1-year deal. Now, he's not on the caliber of those other guys necessarily, but Watt is in his 30s, will be playing most of this season at 31 years old. He'll turn 31 in October. Right now, he's 9th by average annual value. He'll likely be first or second or third. And that is a really steep cost. The cap continues to go up in the NFL, and it's going to continue to go up because the sport is booming like never before and will continue to grow. But Watt is likely expecting Garrett money, which would take him through, if he gets that 4-year deal, it would take him through his age 35 season. Paying a 35-year-old pass rusher potentially near $40 million a year, to me, that's bad business. Watt deserves to be a one-helmet guy. He's earned that. He's forever a Steelers legend, no matter how this offseason goes. But there are real reasons to be concerned about his productivity going forward. He's spent 2 of the last 3 seasons banged up, seriously banged up. Now, the season in the middle, he had 19 sacks, was one of the best defensive players in the NFL. But that's 2 of the last 3 seasons heading into age 30. Those are red flags. You can't ignore them just because you love TJ Watt. And I love TJ Watt. But he's going to get a massive, massive contract, either from the Steelers or from another team. And if you can give him a massive contract on a shorter term deal, like Hunter took from Houston, then that's great. Even a 3-year deal feels feasible if there are outs for the Steelers, but it is scary to lock up such a big number on that side of the ball for a franchise that has been stuck in limbo for so long because of its overspending on the defense and desperately needs cap flexibility to maybe get a franchise quarterback and finally get out of NFL purgatory. The Steelers are the only team heading into 2025 with over 50% cap allocated to the defense, and they're at 60.7% in 2025. The top 10 teams, do you want to hear them? They're not Super Bowl contenders. The Steelers, Packers, Bears. Steelers and Packers, all right, they're probably playoff teams. The Bears might be playoff team. Browns, Colts, Giants, Patriots, Cardinals, Panthers, Raiders. Great franchises, good teams, Super Bowl contenders are not spending this way on the defensive side of the ball. No team is spending over 50% on the defensive side of the ball. So for the Steelers to be at 60 is frankly absurd. And to then lump a massive TJ Watt extension on top of that, probably not the best way to build a Super Bowl contender. The bottom 10, conversely, the Jets, okay, bad franchise. The Lions, the Bills, the Chiefs, the Dolphins, the Jaguars, the Seahawks, Bengals, Saints, Eagles, and Rams. A lot of those teams are going to be competing for playoff spots this next season. And teams like the Eagles and the Rams have spent very little on the defensive side of the ball, have gotten very young on the defensive side of the ball, and have won that way. Now, it's a different situation because those teams have quarterbacks that they're confident in. They have long-term contracts tied into wide receivers and their offensive lines. But you don't win a Super Bowl by being the most expensive defense in the NFL, especially when that defense is not playing it anywhere near a Super Bowl caliber. The Steelers defense got trucked in the playoffs by Baltimore. Mike Tomlin is not getting near enough out of that expensive defense. And it just feels terrifying to continue to head down that path. So if contract negotiations aren't going very well with TJ Watt because he wants $40 million a year for the next 4 seasons, it could be time to look into moving him. It could be time to consider riding out this final year and then letting him walk. And I don't know that TJ Watt would even play one more year. So if you head into training camp, you're probably looking at a hold in, hold out situation with Watt. And that happened the last time he wanted an extension. It was a lot easier to pay him then. Now he's heading into age 31 season. I have a hard time saying that the Steelers should pay TJ Watt. I have a hard time saying the Steelers should continue to do anything they're doing from a roster construction standpoint. They're stuck in purgatory because they're spending too much on a defense and not getting enough out of it. And that is not the fault of TJ Watt. That is absolutely not the fault of TJ Watt. He's been the best player on this defense for years. But again, 2 of the last 3 seasons have been underwhelming because of injuries. And it's not the same situation. They don't play the same style or even really position. But his older brother, JJ Watt, had the same type of injury issues heading into his 30s, and he was not nearly as impactful of a player when he ended up with the Cardinals than he was when he was a 3 or 4-time defensive player of the year with the Texans. It's not to say that they'll have the exact same career trajectory, but it is to say should be on the lookout for it. If the Steelers were in a situation where they're going to contend for the Super Bowl this year, all right, you pay TJ Watt, you worry about that bill when it comes due. But that's not where they are. This is a franchise that needs to be flexible heading into the future. They need to have enough draft capital to attack the guy that they view as the franchise quarterback, be it in this draft class. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a quarterback that the Steelers are tied to a little later, or in next draft class, or in the one after that, or in free agency, or via a trade for a veteran. But this franchise needs flexibility, and locking yourself into an aging superstar edge rusher with injury concerns does not feel like good business, especially one the most recent Super Bowl champions, the last 6 by defensive spending ranking. The Eagles were 25th, the Chiefs were 8th and 10th, the Rams 20th, the Buccaneers 6th, and the Chiefs 25th. So if you have an elite quarterback out of that group, right, you can spend a little more on defense. If you don't, like the Rams or the Eagles, and Stafford to me is an elite quarterback, but he's not a hyper elite Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, because those are the other teams in that list I gave you. They either had Tom Brady or Patrick Mahomes. If you don't have that, you better be spending on offense to have a playoff caliber, Super Bowl caliber offense to compete in the playoffs. The Steelers aren't going to have that type of quarterback anytime soon. So spend on the offense, get young on the defense. That's been the model in the NFL. Even the Chiefs, with their expensive defense, 8th and 10th when they won their back-to-back titles, that was a lot of money tied into Chris Jones and a few veterans while supplementing with a bunch of young pieces around them. Again, the cap is going to continue to explode. So $40 million a year in 4 years may not feel like an albatross, but it is if that player has real injury issues, and it is if you don't have a franchise quarterback on the roster. This could be an escape hatch for the Steelers as a franchise. This contract negotiation with Watt potentially falling apart. It would give the Steelers a chance to get out of the running for Rodgers, trade Watt for an early second in this year's draft, load up on picks, and look for a future quarterback either this year or next. I don't think there are future quarterbacks that the Steelers will have access to in this draft, but continue to load up on young players and continue to load up on draft capital for next year. It would make the Metcalf deal feel a bit incongruent, but the team desperately needed a wide receiver, and he's young enough to still be a foundational piece. Maybe in this whole situation, Watt's frustration is about the Rodgers situation. Maybe that's the crux of all of it. There's been speculation that Watt is growing frustrated. This is purely speculation. This is not reporting. But that's what we have to do when players throw out on Instagram, a cryptic Instagram story. Maybe that frustration is about the Rodgers situation. And maybe extension talks are on hold until Rodgers makes his decision, which would make sense to me. If Rodgers signs, you have a veteran quarterback in place that you feel can compete for a playoff win or two. Probably not a Super Bowl, but a playoff win or two would feel pretty damn good considering it's been since 2016. In that case, you need Watt for the next year or two and are acting as an all-in franchise with an aging QB. If Rodgers doesn't, there's no reason not to just blow it up. And that further begs the question, if your entire organizational direction comes down to an over 40-year-old QB searching for his third team after submarining an entire franchise, shouldn't you take that as a sign and just rebuild anyways? That's what I would do. That's what I would do. The Steelers are in a bind. One, they've put themselves in, but there are ways to get out of it. Get young and get cheap. And then get the quarterback. Instead, they're staying old and expensive and are hoping an old quarterback can solve all their problems. In the context of everything the Steelers have done, I want them to get Aaron Rodgers because I think it gives them the best chance of winning a playoff game this year. In the context of winning a Super Bowl and the long-term outlook for this franchise, Rodgers can take a hike. Let's lose a bunch of games with Mason Rudolph this year, trade some stars from the defense, and load up for a young QB in the future. So, would the TJ Watt deal, if there is a deal to be made, a trade to be made, jumpstart that rebuild? Let's take a look at some historical comps and maybe what TJ Watt would fetch on the trade market. Before we jump into that, if you enjoy this show, if you enjoy what I do, what Tommy and Shane do on Wednesdays, make sure you're subscribed to the Still Curtain on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. We really appreciate your support. Doing a lot of fun stuff. And Tommy and Shane, their mock drafts on Wednesdays have been fantastic to listen to. So if you haven't caught those yet, go back and listen to them. And I'm sure they'll have more great stuff this Wednesday talking about all things Steelers heading into the draft. We're getting closer to it. I'm not really focusing on it today because I feel like this Watt news is a little bigger, but be subscribed to get all of that in the future. So, what would Watt potentially fetch on the trade market? Well, this is just anytime a hyper elite edge rusher is on the market, or even sub elite edge rusher is on the market, everyone goes, well, could they get the Khalil Mack package? Which actually didn't work out for the Raiders. We're going to revisit it, but that trade didn't really work out for the Raiders because they were doing just an abysmal job drafting at that point as a franchise. But when Khalil Mack was 27, the Bears gave up 2 firsts, a third, and a sixth for Mack, a second, and a fifth. That is the trade that everyone harkens back to anytime it came up when Myles Garrett requested a trade. It came up in the Trey Hendrickson trade request situation from Cincinnati, which further complicates the market for the Steelers potentially moving Watt. Because there's another talented edge that I actually think had a better I know had a better season than Watt last year, also on the market. But the more realistic comp to me is Mac's trade from Chicago to the Chargers. When Mac was 31, he had 3 years left on his deal, so it's a little bit different than Watt with just one left needing an extension. But the Chargers gave up a second and a sixth. The Steelers would probably be happy and lucky to get an early second for Watt, which feels crazy as a Steelers fan, my relationship to Watt, every fan's relationship to Watt, what he's meant to this franchise, how great he's been, how dominant he's been. But considering the age, considering the injury history, a second would be a really good deal. The Steelers would be very lucky to get a first, especially when you throw on top of all of that, the new team has to give him an extension. And you add in that Trey Hendrickson, also 30 years old, is also on the trade market and is probably the better bet at this point. He's been healthier and he's been more productive in a worse situation on that Cincinnati defense, effectively carrying it all by himself. If the Steelers get a second for Watt in a hypothetical trade, that's not a transformational thing in a rebuild. It would replace the Metcalf second, so that would be nice. Getting the Steelers back there where there are a lot of talented running backs and a bunch of great defensive linemen and edge rushers. It gives you more flexibility in the first round. Maybe it lets you take a swing on Jalen Milroe, though it looks like he's probably going to be a late first rounder. That's not transformation. But what could be transformational is not having that contract on the books heading into the future. So this comes down to the same question that I asked at the very beginning of the show, and I've been asking for years from the Steelers. What is your direction? You have to pick one. You can't have both. Are you trying to win the Super Bowl this year or next year? A 2-year window of being all in? Or are you looking to take a step back in the immediate future to win long term? The Steelers, as they always have under Mike Tomlin, are operating like they want to win the most possible games this season and are sacrificing both the present and the future to win 9 or 10 games and lose in the first round of the playoffs. But this is a chance to finally make that decision. What is your direction? If you're all in, you sign Rodgers, you sign Watt to an extension. You don't care what the number is. You need him here because the Steelers will win when he's on the field and they'll lose when he's off it. We've all seen those stats for years and years. Draft immediate help on the offensive side of the ball. Maybe Amarion Hampton, the running back out of North Carolina. That's a win now move. I would like it a lot better than the Najee Harris draft pick. It's still not my favorite use of the first round pick, but if you're all in and you want to give Rodgers support on the offense, okay, that's a direction. If you're looking to retool or rebuild or whatever term you want to put to it, let Rodgers retire. Let him walk somewhere else. You trade Watt, maybe even you trade Pickens. Trade back in the first round to compile more draft picks for this year and next. Continue to reload through the trenches. Do not draft Amarion Hampton in the first round or any other running back, and you build up the defensive line with Derek Harmon or Kenneth Grant. Those are two diverging paths, and I'll be okay with either one the Steelers pick. I will. I don't love the all-in because I don't think you can win a Super Bowl, but at least it's a direction, it's a clear directive from the organization that Mike Tomlin needs to win a playoff game this year with a veteran quarterback and a talented and expensive defense. And if he doesn't, okay, we can reevaluate the coach after the year under those circumstances. I'd prefer the second option, but the Steelers have to pick one. They cannot middle this. They've been middling it for way too long. If Rodgers doesn't sign, don't give Watt the extension. If Rodgers does sign, give Watt the extension. You can't do one and not the other. They have to match up. Windows are so fickle in the NFL. You have to line everything up to really win in the playoffs and have a roster capable of doing that. So I hope that the Steelers understand that and will operate that way this offseason, because I see this as a crossroads for the organization, for the franchise, and it could be a defining moment for the years to come. As could drafting a quarterback in the 2025 NFL draft. I talked a lot about Jalen Milroe last week and the Steelers' potential interest there, with Milroe getting a first-round draft invite, or getting a draft invite, which likely means he's going to be a first-round pick. The Steelers now, after bringing him in on a pre-draft visit, are being linked to Shedeur Sanders, the quarterback out of Colorado, obviously, as everyone knows, the son of Deion Sanders. And this is an interesting, before I jump into this, actually, some stuff from the chat from R Barley 18, who's always just fantastic on this and a great loyal listener. He brought up a good point about TJ Watt and maybe his what could affect his trade market. TJ Watt is very undersized and not a fit in most places. I don't know about very undersized necessarily, but he's a true 3-4 outside linebacker. You're likely not, if you're a 4-3 team, gonna just plug him at 4-3 defensive end. He's a stand-up outside edge rusher, stand-up outside linebacker. That's why he's such a good fit in Pittsburgh and uniquely valuable to the Steelers. And I think that's a really good point to bring up. That's going to limit where the teams that are interested in Watt, and potentially further depress his market, especially when Hendrickson is a 4-3 defensive end. So maybe those two won't impact each other as much as I'm thinking about it now. That I just thought that was an interesting point that was brought up in the chat, and I always love to bring up the chat. I was on a roll there on my monologue, so I missed a lot of those from our Barley 18, but really appreciate you bring that up, and I think it's an interesting point. Back to Sanders. The Steelers now being linked to him. He could potentially slide to 21. For a while, he was the favorite to go in the top 3. He was favored to go in the top 3. Now his over-under, I believe, is at number 9, where the Saints sit. I would find it unlikely that he'd get past the Saints, especially with Derek Carr's new injury news and further injury history, and the Saints just being a confusing, always trying to win now franchise that would love to just plug in a quarterback like Sanders and try to keep winning for no reason. But with the Steelers bringing in Sanders on this visit, Khan and Weidel, if they love him, they could trade up. They traded up for Broderick Jones. Steelers in the past have traded into the top 10 for Devin Bush. Trading up for a quarterback is a different thing entirely. I just wanted to mention this on the way out because I think that would be another massive mistake that the Steelers can make this offseason, as would be drafting Jalen Milroe in the first round. I'm not in on most of this quarterback class. I really like Cam Ward at the top. I think he has top 10, 12 potential in the NFL, potential to become a top 10 to 12 quarterback in the league. I think he has a lot of creativity, a big arm. I think Shedeur Sanders has a lot of glaring flaws and doesn't have the physical tools to overcome them. And Cody Williams came on a few weeks ago. We broke down on the quarterbacks, but on Sanders, he has tendencies to bail out of the pocket and wants to play as not necessarily a scrambler, but an out of pocket creator, a second reaction guy. He drifts far too much. He's willing to take a hit. It's not a fear of taking a hit. He's tough as nails, takes big hits and gets back up, has been playing behind a really poor offensive line in Colorado for the past 2 seasons. and turned around that program, which was just a mess. But he has a play style that's incongruent with his physical abilities. He likes to get out of the pocket. He's not going to be able to beat defensive ends to the edge in the NFL. He likes to throw off platform. I don't think he has the arm to do that consistently and not get burned. I view Sanders as somebody who could be, there have been a lot of these comps, could be an Andy Dalton, could be a Kirk Cousins at his peak if he is willing to sit in the pocket and be that kind of player. I actually like what I like his ability when he does that. I think he's a good thrower, not an elite one, but he's very accurate and he can throw with anticipation and timing. If you get him in a system where he's going to do that very often behind a good offensive line with talented receivers, I think he could be a good quarterback in the NFL. I don't think he's going to be a franchise elevator. So trading up for him to me would be a mistake. Taking him in the first round at all, quarterback value is so interesting. And if he falls to 21, it's not like a D minus draft grade if they take Shador, but I would not I would feel like it's making the Kenny Pickett mistake again. So the Steelers are linked to Shador Sanders. I don't think that's something that's going to happen. They're doing their due diligence ahead of the draft. I don't think that's something that's going to happen, but if it does, I would not be a fan of that. There's a reason he's starting to slide down draft boards and even willing to take a visit with the Steelers who pick at 21. And I think drafting him is trying to plug a need instead of drafting a player worthy of a first round pick. And the Steelers, to me, are not in a position to do that because I don't think this is a Super Bowl roster that's a quarterback away. I think there are big time flaws all over the roster that need to be addressed with a long-term vision. So I am not interested in the Steelers taking Shador Sanders in the first round. I don't think he'll get to them, but if he did, I'd prefer them to pass. That's going to be it for me. We're getting close to the draft. Going to do more draft stuff next week, obviously, leading right into it. It's such an exciting time of year. A lot is up in the air for the Steelers specifically. They don't know who their quarterback's going to be. Is the star edge rusher going to be around? What do they need in the first round? Are they going to draft another quarterback? Just so many questions. So make sure you stay tuned to the Still Curtain podcast and stillcurtain.com to check out Tommy and Shane's great work and all the contributors over there at stillcurtain.com. I'll be back next Monday with another show, so make sure you're subscribed for that. And until then, as always, go Steelers.